I'm Barbara Feeley. I work in the out-of-home advertising industry, and I'm also a member of the Woodbury family. And so I am responsible for managing our out-of-home business. And this is just a quick taste of some of the things I'm going to talk about today, but this is one of my more favorite creative contents that's been made for these building screens that are popping up all over America and throughout the world. And so this one is on a building in Korea, and you'll notice that it's paired with advertising digital screens beneath it. So while the art catches the eye, they're paying for this kind of stuff by running ads concurrently with the cool digital art that's been created. Moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my family history and my family company and my personal journey, and then I'm going to speak more about the business I'm working on. So my great-grandfather, F.O. Woodbury, founded Woodbury Corporation in 1919. We're a 102-year-old family business. We currently have third and fourth generation family members managing the business, and I'm so grateful to get to work with my family every day. It really is fun seeing them and growing our business together. F.O. started his career in the furniture business, and he took a temporary job with his brother-in-law, managing real estate property and selling homes for a commission. And it wasn't long before he realized that he would never go back to the furniture business because he loved doing real estate so much and was making great money. F.O. instilled the values and values that we operate today at Woodbury Corporation, and his lessons and stories still live on at our company. So to give you a little bit further forward into my generation, the black and white photo here is my grandfather, Wallace Woodbury, and believe it or not, my grandfather was also a real estate developer. And I'll save you, I don't have time to go through all the many awards he received or titles he held, but I'll tell you one thing about my grandfather: he really loved what he did. And he would often say to my father that he never worked a day in his life for money. And I think what that meant for him was just that he did everything he did because he loved it, not because he needed the money to do it. And so he was quoted in a 1966 business feature in the Salt Lake Tribune as saying, "I cannot deny the personal satisfaction you get when driving around and seeing the building or that industry that you helped influence or arrange to be there. You're involved in the growth of the community." And at Woodbury Corporation, we are really focused on that value as well. We want to make sure we're doing projects that grow the communities that we're in. And we hope every time we set out to do something that makes a city or a place better. The strapping young gentleman also pictured next to my grandfather here is my dad. And guess what? My dad is a real estate developer as well. Mind blown, I know. My dad, along with his two brothers and his two cousins, represent the third generation of our family. They're all active members in the business still today, and we're lucky to have their mentorship and guidance as we move forward into the fourth generation. And frankly, probably the fifth generation sooner than later. And so my dad's a deal guy. He loves to make deals, and he knows every single way you could structure a partnership, and where very few people see opportunities, my dad always seems to have an angle. And at Woodbury, we really believe in win-win deals, and the reason why I feel one of the reasons that's contributed to us succeeding for so long is that we do everything honest above board, and we want to do deals where no one's being cheated and everyone feels like they're winning. And without that value, I don't think we would have had the longevity that we've had. So I don't think it's fair to talk about myself without talking about the other half of my family. My great-grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. She lost her parents and her brother during World War II to the Nazis, and was able to hid in a convent and was able to go to school after the war and move to America. And upon arriving in America, she became the first woman to earn a doctorate at Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute, a renowned engineering university in upstate New York. After that, she went on to teach for 30 years in chemistry at a university outside Kansas City. And I'll never forget doing science experiments with my grandmother in her basement. And because of her and my grandfather, Bill, who was also a chemist, I really developed a love for the sciences. The last remaining young lady on the screen here is my mother. My mother got a doctorate in math education from the University of Utah, and she started one of Utah's first charter schools. And I remember my mom used to get mad at me in high school and junior high for getting A minuses. And I would always, be upset. None of my friends were doing as well as me and wonder why she pushed me so hard, and she would just say that she knew I could do better. And I think because of my mom, I developed my competitive edge and my drive to succeed. So this is me as a baby, the youngest little sister to 3 older brothers, and so I think this picture suits me well, always a bit of a tomboy. When I graduated from high school, the only thing I knew I didn't want to do, or thought I knew I didn't want to do, was work at Woodbury. I was younger. I was one of the youngest cousins in my generation, and so I always assumed older cousins would fill the roles at the company. And also, I really loved the sciences. I had earned a full-ride scholarship to go study forensic science at West Virginia University. And so this picture here is actually my dad dropping me off to my dorm freshman year. I moved to a place where I knew nobody and had only visited once. And for the record, I am so thankful I made that choice. I loved West Virginia. It was an amazing place to be, and I'll spare you all the recruiting pitch. What's that? I started there in forensic science, straight into the forensic science coursework, and I thought I loved it and I was on the right path. But after my freshman year, I took an internship with the Salt Lake City Police Department. And they treated me great, and it was a good experience. But after doing that, I realized that I didn't want to be a forensic scientist, and that I didn't see myself in a position like that. And so over the course of my college career, I eventually settled on chemistry, and I graduated with a degree in chemistry, not really sure what I was going to do with my life. After school, I stuck with sports, as my intro kind of mentioned. I joined this women's team up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We went to the national championship tournament 4 times and lost 3 times, only to finally win it that 4th year. And upon accomplishing that, I took the MCAT and scored okay. And I remember talking to my dad about how I really just didn't want to be a doctor. And so it didn't make sense for me to go to medical school. And then I took the GMAT as well, but never applied to a school. So I was kind of just trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And in the meantime, I was working for my dad on various projects, trying to keep some income coming in while I studied for tests and did all those things. And one day, a woman called our office, pretty typical call. My dad was a really busy guy back then, and we scheduled and rescheduled the meeting with this woman several times, but finally we met. This woman had worked for a billboard company that unfortunately was selling their business to a competitor, and she didn't want to work for that competitor. And so instead, she came to us and asked my dad if we could start a billboard business together. And that is the genesis of what I do today. So we structured a company called Top Ad Media, and we were off and running. Along the way, about a year later, we restructured for one more partner who brought a book of business and a wealth of relationships, and most of all, a brand, Compass, which is our public-facing brand today. And so you can see our Compass billboards out on the freeway. We've got the little logo underneath each of the signs if you're wondering which ones are ours. The rest is kind of history. We've quadrupled our business since we started, and we're now the largest digital off-premise screen operator in the state of Utah. And so enough about me. Let's talk a little bit more about signs. So I'm going to go way back in history to start here. Some argue that the first billboards were the Egyptian hieroglyphics. The government and pharaohs would carve out the laws of the land onto the walls such that the masses would understand what they were. But if we look at modern day times, really the genesis of outdoor advertising and out-of-home advertising was the invention of the movable type printing press. Now this invention allowed for the affordable and easy reproduction of books. And so it created literacy and education across all levels of society, and that's its major contributing factor. But one of its secondary factors is that it allowed us to create the first handbill. And so these were paper advertisements that were posted or distributed in central business districts for the first time. Now, more than 300 years later, a German by the name of Alois Sennenfelder discovered the printing technique of lithography. Sennenfelder was a playwright and an actor that wanted to distribute his works more widely, but couldn't afford the movable type press setup, which involved carving individual letters and setting up unique pages. And so he, writing on a piece of limestone with a greased pencil, discovered that the oily words that he had written could be transferred to a piece of paper. And so just really quickly, at a very high level, to go through what happens, the artist can draw or write whatever they're hoping to print directly onto the stone. And then when you rub water on that stone and use an oily-based ink, the ink only adheres to the image that was drawn on the stone, and it doesn't adhere to the watery regions. They take advantage of the chemical resistance of water and oil to create the print that's then on the other side. And so for the first time, people were now able to replicate images, and not just written images, but art and all sorts of other things. So how does that translate to outdoor advertising? In 1835, widely considered the first billboards in America, Barnum and Bailey was traveling around as a circus troupe, and they were going from city to city, and they needed a way to announce that they had arrived and that people should come. And so Jared Bell in 1835 created these posters for them. They were 50 square feet to spread around town when they arrived to invite people to come to their show. Another person that became famous for these lithographic posters was a guy named Jules Charest in Paris. And at first he would produce these 3-color scenes for theaters and for cabarets around town. And all of these posters would be all over Paris. But that evolved into more advertising type things. Eventually he was doing these posters for beverages and for perfumes and all sorts of products. And so this was kind of the genesis of what the modern billboard is today. And so I'm not going to hit every bullet on this timeline. We're going to fast forward into the 1900s here. But basically mid-1800s is when you first start seeing billboard structures built throughout America, along the trolley car routes and along the roadways. And what's important is in 1891, all of those bill posters formed an association. And what's relevant to that is 9 years later, they all agreed on a standardization of size. And that's a huge deal for back then, because as you can imagine, as I just described, setting up a singular print took a lot of work and effort. And so if you could print the same size print and image for every single sign across America, all of a sudden you're able to make a nationwide campaign. So the Cokes and the Kellogg's of the world, for the first time, started using outdoor advertising as a means of building brand awareness. I'll also just note that in 1913, ad companies started giving away open space to charities, and they continue to do that today. And in 1934, we established the Traffic Audit Bureau, or TAB, which quantified how much traffic was seeing each sign, thereby giving advertisers a better idea of the value they were getting out of purchasing the ad space. And I'm going to come back and talk about tab in a later slide. So that was 1934. So before I leave this slide, one more thing. In 1908, remember, Ford Motor Company started selling their Model T cars. And so when that happened, all of a sudden there was a lot more movement between cities and on roadways. And as you can imagine, there was a proliferation of signs at that point as there were more and more opportunities to catch traffic moving. Because of that, by 1965, the federal government felt like it was important to start regulating how signage could be placed along roadways. And so under President Lyndon B. Johnson, they passed the Bonus Act and the Highway Beautification Act. And those are still largely the regulations that determine how and where we can put billboards today. The Highway Beautification Act was the most important one. And it tells us how big a billboard can be, where it can be located, only in commercial zones, and how far it has to be from another billboard. And most importantly, it created a means for municipalities to remove billboards by paying just compensation to the billboard owner. And so this was kind of the beginning of the outdoor advertising industry. And the last thing I'll say is that there's a federal code. There's also a state code that regulates signs. And then in each city, there's a city code that regulates signs. And then even at big developments, most big developments have a CC&R or a development agreement that also regulates signs. And so this is a huge, there's so much code we're always trying to maneuver and figure out. But there are a lot of barriers to entry to this business as well. So now, same time, so that was 1965 when the Bonus Act was passed. I'm going to jump across the Atlantic now to France. A guy by the name of Jean-Claude Decaux, for the first time, invented a new business concept called street furniture. And what this was, it was in Lyon, France, the first place they did it. They promised the city they'd put in these nice new-looking bus shelters at no cost to the city itself. But instead, they would have rights to put advertising inside of those bus shelters. And that's how they would finance the cost. And so needless to say, this was a very successful idea and partnership. And J.C. Decaux has now grown to be the largest outdoor advertising company in the world. And they've made their had their heyday making these public-private partnerships with cities throughout the world and putting up amenities in these cities for the exchange of the rights to sell advertising. And so just really quick to run through these pictures. 1966 was their first move out of France. This is one of their first bus shelters in Brussels, Belgium. In 1972, they started backlighting their ads for the first time. So this provided light to the street as well as made the advertising look a little better in the structures. In the 1980s, they started putting up electronic message boards as part of their program. And they also started doing public toilets. If any of you have ever been to Paris, you'll notice these little public toilet structures. There's even some in San Francisco. And so that was another amenity they gave to cities. In 2003, they partnered with Vienna, Austria, to do the first self-service bike scheme. And that concept is now, moved out worldwide. There are green select health bikes up in Salt Lake City now. And so J.C. Decaux, I really feel like, has been a great leader in our industry to do really cool, innovative projects. One of the things they do is they do these things that they call the Morris columns. And for each column that they do, they make it unique to the city that it's in. And so this is just 6 of the cities that they're currently in, as you can tell, all over the world. But notice that each column looks different. And so they're trying to cater it to the fabric of the urban environment they're in. So last thing I'll say about J.C. Decaux is I think looking at what they're doing now says a lot about where our industry is now, too. In Paris in 2016, they installed their first intelligent street furniture. And I'll speak a little bit more about what that means. And in addition to these being intelligent, they will also give a free Wi-Fi hotspot to anybody on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. And so that was the amenity that those brought. In London, they now have 1,000 screens on bus shelters in London, and they're self-described as the digital showcase, their digital showcase to the world. And for the first time in America, in 2017 in Chicago, they've signed a digital screen street furniture agreement with Chicago. They put up 150 of these in the central business district of Chicago. And so I say all that to say that the future of out-of-home advertising really is digital. And I think that the static billboard advertisements will always exist. It's not feasible that every single one of them would become digital. But I think you're going to find more and more non-traditional billboard opportunities that are digital screens. And that's how our industry is going to grow. One thing I often hear, and you say, why should I do digital advertising instead of doing the static advertising? When I buy a static ad, I'm up 100% of the time instead of sharing the time with other customers. And so the biggest thing is no cost to install. So you're saving yourself $1,000 to $1,500 on a traditional billboard right there by not having to pay that printing cost. The second thing is unlimited copy changes. Just today we got an email from a client that said, I don't like the way my image is looking and I want to switch it out to this one. Well, with static advertising, that would cost you $1,000. With this, we can do that as many times as you want. Another thing is it's an advertising catered to variables. I think that some people don't realize that these aren't just TV screens. There are computers inside each of these screens. And so we can use artificial intelligence to cater your advertising to variables. If it's 90 degrees outside, play the ice cream ad. And if it's 50 degrees outside, play the coffee ad. And otherwise, play the generic ad. And all of that can be set up to execute automatically. And so you can imagine the many different avenues and ways you can take advantage of that. And the last thing I'll say is that I spoke to the fact that the out-of-home advertising has been donating ad space since 1913. This really allows us to take advantage of our spoilage by helping a community. And so I love that aspect of it, that we can give space to Orem City at University Mall, or help the state of Utah run their COVID campaign. Because we have this medium now where things can be posted without cost. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit more about all the innovations in technology. So I'm sure most of you have seen this screen at University Place here. The one on the building there looks like a vibrant full LED screen, but it's actually bars of LEDs that are spaced pretty far apart when you get up close to them. And so from the inside of the building, what it looks like is black blinds. And there's space between each of the blinds, but it blocks some of that south-facing sun all day, and you can't even tell that there's an LED screen out there. Whereas from the outside, obviously we have an awesome architectural feature. And if you survey cities in Asia, almost every building in the skyline has something like this on it. And I don't think that America will ever necessarily get that crazy. But I do think that we're trending in that direction, and that there's going to be more and more creative uses of LED screens and LED technology on the buildings in our cities. A second technology that's come about is a light trespass technology. This is one of our billboards in Bluffdale, Utah. And as you'll notice, there's a neighborhood just across the freeway here. That our billboard is frighteningly close to. And so we were trying to figure out a way to keep the light from trespassing into this neighborhood. And we found a company in Canada called Media Resources who hooked us up with this awesome new technology. And so the image from the freeway is just as bright and vibrant as you see it when you first see the billboard. But as it pans into the neighborhood, the image completely blacks out. And so this will be a way for us to consciously be good community members and make our signs the most effective and do exactly what we want them to do. The last thing I'm just going to show you is a really cool sign down in Vegas. I think I went too fast. There we go. There it is. Okay, a really cool sign down in Vegas. It's just in front of the Forum Shops at Caesar's Palace. And every single piece of this sign is an LED screen. And I've heard that they have one person full-time managing this sign alone, the content and the maintenance of this sign. And so we're far from perfecting this technology, but just a cool example of the many things that we're going to be able to do with this LED technology. You know, rounded edges, different content panels. This is a really cool sign if you have the opportunity to go see it in Vegas. So the last technological advancement I'm going to talk about isn't in the real world necessarily, or something you can see. So I mentioned TAB, the Traffic Audit Bureau. They historically have been using traffic count statistics and surveys and forecasting what traffic counts were. And so that's how they would rate the signs. And as you can imagine, two signs that were right next to each other on the same roadway with the same traffic count would receive the same rating based on the way they did it for decades. Now, in the last decade, TAB has reinvented itself as Geopath. And the invention of mobile geolocators and car geolocators have made our industry so much better, because now we can identify individually by sign the kind of traffic that's seeing it. And so we're no longer making forecasting guesses about how many people are seeing our signs. We're monitoring real-time cell phone traffic data to quantify how many people are seeing, and even better, who's seeing our sign. I know you've probably heard that you have an anonymous ID on the internet that's tracking all the things you do. Well, billboards are utilizing that technology now too. So this was just to give you an idea of some of the stuff that comes out of Geopath. This was their latest publication. It's been really fun to watch. Well, I don't know if fun's the right word, but it's been really interesting to watch how COVID has affected traffic in our country. And so Geopath is all over that, especially because we need to guarantee to our advertisers that the space that they're buying is still as valuable as it was before. So this is the Salt Lake DMA, which compromises pretty much the whole state of Utah. And you'll notice that in 2019, the gray line, this is saying how many miles does the average person travel in a day. And so it's saying that in 2019, we're just over 20 miles a day was the average travel distance of a person, okay? And in 2020, last thing to say is this was from January to March in the year. So in 2020, you'll notice we were just slightly above 2019. And then once the COVID virus hit and we went on lockdown, the purple line immediately falls off and people stop traveling as much. And now the gray line in the blue line in 2021, you'll see, is almost right in line with that 2019 line. So where our state has opened up and people have begun to move again, people are moving just as much. The one thing I will say is what they've found is that the patterns aren't the same. There are less commuting trips, of course, and people are moving in different ways than they did before. But so that's Salt Lake. I think it's interesting to compare that to a market like San Francisco. So in San Francisco, you'll notice the 2019 line is about stagnant. The 2020 line begins to fall off a little sooner. If you'll recall, San Francisco was one of the first cities to close when the COVID virus hit. And then in 2021, you'll notice they're almost 20% less in people movement than they were pre-COVID. And so Geopath is responsible to reporting to our advertisers these trends. And so the last thing I'll say is that's our nonprofit organization that reports to the advertising agencies. Obviously, there are a lot of private corporations that are taking advantage of this data as well. And so this heat map is from Hivestack's website. And so what these companies are doing is called programmatic, and they're looking for real-time trends in cellular mobile data, and as that trend shows that it's, so for example, if they were looking to serve ads to women only, and the trend shows that the mobile phones in an area are more greatly men than women, then they will serve ads to those signs specifically. And they're tracking that in real time. And so for that, it makes the advertiser's budget much more efficient because they're getting real relevant viewers. And then it also, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, it's crazy to me this is happening, is what I'd say. I think that everyone knows that online this is happening and that the ads that you're seeing on your computer and your phones, but realize that the screens in your life are also going to be taking advantage of this technology. And so it won't be weird to walk into a store and see that the screen automatically flips to the item that you had been searching online. And so, having said all that, just a little taste of the advertising business. I hope that we're able to continue to grow our company and expand into other markets, and I'm excited to be in this line of business. So that's all I got.
Questions?
Questions? Yeah.
How did you guys change your advertising when the pandemic started? Like, what locations did you start targeting, or just cut it all?
Yeah, so when the pandemic started, I would say it was more about assuring our advertisers that they were getting the impressions they bought at the existing locations. And so relying on a lot of geopath data to say that people are still leaving their homes, because I think the overall impression is that no one leaves their house anymore. But the reality for us is just that they're going different places or taking different routes that they did in the past. And so there were a couple months there where we struggled with that dilemma, but eventually we were able to convince buyers that things were trending more towards normal and people were still leaving their homes even though they weren't commuting to work anymore. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I guess a follow-up is, so now do you guys think it would be better to put billboards or I guess digital signage ads around closer to communities like home areas, or would you still want to place them in highway?
I don't think that we'll ever put off-premise signs in residential areas, but I do think it'll be interesting to see how the future of freeways with automated cars, and I think the central business district of cities is going to become more and more valuable, and in the long-term future, ad advertising on the freeways that exist today may become less and less. And so I don't know. It's a strategy of ours to make sure we're doing both, I'd say, is what I'd comment.
What about like the privacy concerns? I mean, especially towards the end with the geopath, this real-world updating. I mean, should people be getting paid for that information that we're giving? Or, I mean, should we be able to opt out of it?
Yep. So there's a great line in The Social Dilemma, which is on Netflix. I don't know if any of you have caught it. But it's that if you aren't paying for the product, you are the product. And I think that it's a real issue they're going to have to tackle. What I will say for our industry is that we are doing the opposite of looking for individuals. We are trying to catch every single cell phone out there and make sure we know exactly how many people. And so I think for our industry, it's a little bit less intrusive in that regard. But in California, they just passed a law that you have a right to opt out of those data things. And I know that there are people out there trying to figure out how to pay individuals for giving up their data. And so, well, all I can say is it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out in the future, and it's definitely relevant. Back there? Sorry.
I just wanted to add, so for the bus stops in France that use the Wi-Fi, is that how they get
Bingo. So when you sign into their, when you agree to use their free Wi-Fi, of course there's fine print that tells you they get to track everything that you do there. And now, as you can imagine, now they're selling ads to people that they know exactly what they're doing and what their movements are on the Champs-Élysées. And to my point at the end there, they can deliver an ad specifically to someone walking past the sign based on what their cell phone's telling them. Yes, sir.
Barbara, my guess is your family has had dozens of calls, hundreds of calls, for someone interested in a new business opportunity. What diligence did you do, and what even sparked your interest to get into this business? Because you're known as a real estate group. Yes, this is sitting on real estate, but it wasn't your core business. What made you get into it, and how did you do your due diligence?
There was a lot of family discussion, I'll put it that way, about doing something new. A lot of questions, but it's exactly what you said, Professor McDonald, that this, at its core, we decided was a real estate asset. You're signing a lease or you're buying property to put a sign up, and we already own property in a lot of high traffic locations, and so this would be a way for us to unlock hidden value in all of our real estate assets, as well as help other developers do something that they're not thinking about. With regard to new things, I would say that in general, my family is pretty resistant to new things or businesses outside of our core. And so luckily, this was a bit of a hybrid. But I will say the woman that approached us, my dad had a lot of faith in her, and we had a history of working with her. And so I think that gave the family confidence that this could maybe work.
And if you would go, the personal relationship is what allowed you to even think about it, perhaps, but you did your own due diligence. How long did that process take? I don't think this is something you decided in a week. Could you give us some direction there?
Yeah, so it probably took 6 months to a year. Luckily, one of my brothers moved back to Salt Lake, and he had a lot of experience. He had been working in investment banking, and so he helped us develop a business plan. And one of our windfalls was there were some billboards available for sale at the time. And so being able to create a justifiable business plan to get this kicked off and started is really what got us going. Yep.
So what percentage of businesses that choose to advertise on billboards, specifically yours, because I'm sure you know the stats on that, receive the ROI that they're looking for, or at least a positive ROI from investing in a billboard?
Yeah, so it's traditionally, as I mentioned, really hard to measure the ROI of a billboard, especially because there was virtually no data other than a traffic count tied to it. Nowadays, I think that measurement is becoming a little better as they're more sophisticatedly putting ads out. But really, billboards are about brand awareness. They can't be skipped. They can't be fast-forwarded through. If you're out there, you're going to see them. And so it's, all of the ad mediums are shrinking right now. Newspaper, radio, TV, there are more and more channels, and the ad dollars are becoming more and more diluted, and less and less money is being spent there. The difference is digital, which is the online advertising, obviously. And so they found statistically, billboards are one of the best things to pair with that kind of social campaigning and online campaigning, because it creates a much greater reach and frequency for those social ads, reminding people what they saw when they were looking at their Facebook timeline. And so that's kind of the approach of billboards, is to couple it with a lot of the advertising companies are already doing today. And because of that, out-of-home and digital are the only two growing ad mediums right now.
2 questions from students online.
Okay.
How does sharing information benefit me, the consumer? I know it benefits the advertiser. How does it benefit me as a consumer? And then follow it up with, what's your favorite billboard?
All right. how does it benefit you as a consumer? You're seeing relevant ads is all I'll say. I don't know how much that's a benefit or not to one person or another, but you're seeing things that are relevant to you. And so that, in theory, boosts the sales tax and the economy in the place that you live. And so it hopefully helps your community be better. That's a tough one. And then my favorite billboard advertisement, put me on the spot here. I'm trying to think of a good one now, but get creative here. I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that one maybe for lunch.
Homie's pretty good.
Homie, they're one of the top spenders in our market. One more question?
So for that add-on, specifically the wave that you see saw in Korea, what markets are most likely to benefit from something like that? And why is Asia more receptive to something like that as opposed to the US?
Yeah, it's just definitely about LED screens. I mean, I can't tell you many times I've heard out of a city council member or even just a citizen, we don't want to become Vegas. And I think it's just a perception here in America that LED screens are a bad thing sometimes. And I guess I'm out there to prove that they aren't. But I think that's really the difference. And then, sorry, what was your first question?
Just specifically what markets are more kind of receptive, I guess.
Yeah.
Digital art or, that.
As I mentioned, it really is a function of the local jurisdiction. So, there's the state, there's the federal, but really it's about finding a city that's willing to do it. And so Chicago has been really innovative with JC2Co. It's a great partnership. They actually put up digitals on the freeway about a decade ago. And so this is kind of the second evolution of that. And cities, I think that digital networks in cities are really valuable. And I think that sometimes cities look at the bad parts of a digital screen instead of realizing all the benefits that they could bring to their city. And so I don't know. Orem City was great to work with, and they let us put a state-of-the-art LED mesh screen on a building in Orem. And you would think that that would happen in Salt Lake before it happened here, right? But so it's just a function of getting a city to work with you and seeing the vision of how this could make their city better.
They must have a great city council.
Yeah, something like that. Sure.
What is the personal fulfillment that you find in, your specific industry, like a digital media and advertising? Like, how do you feel like that communicates your desires for your career?
Yeah, I'm in the business of growing other businesses. And so it's kind of the similar lines of my grandfather's quote there, that the coolest part about what I do is seeing other businesses become successful because of what we're doing for them. And so I never want to deliver a campaign that isn't effective for a customer. And it's so much fun to see customers grow and buy more and more advertising from us, knowing that what we're doing to help them is effective.
I have time for one more question.
Do you guys ever say no to advertising? Is there a standard you guys kind of have, or does the city set the standard, or how do you guys go about kind of screening?
Yep, so it's a private company, so it's kind of at our discretion whether we say yes or no to an ad. And there are plenty of those discussions as well. I don't think there's a written policy or code about what we put up. We kind of handle it on a case-by-case basis. What I will say is venue is relevant. What I would put up on a billboard in Salt Lake City is not necessarily what I would put up on a billboard in Orem. And just because speaking to the audience or the community that I'm in. And so we try to be conscious of that as well.
Well, thank you very much. Thank Barbara for coming.
Thanks, guys.